The year is 1944. Across France, Sherman tanks thunder forward. This is Patton's Third Army, driven by speed. Patton's philosophy: attack relentlessly, keep the enemy off balance, end the war quickly. He wanted to avoid the trenches of World War I, envisioning a war of movement and breakthroughs. The Third Army's dash liberated towns at a breathtaking pace. Patton became a hero, but the relentless advance came at a cost: exhaustion and anxiety for the men at the front. Patton's speed brought victory, but also hardship and stress for his soldiers. Life at the tip of Patton's spear was a cycle of fear and fatigue. Soldiers fought by day, advanced by night, and slept in short, fitful bursts, if at all. Rest was sacrificed for momentum. Exhaustion became their constant companion. As they pushed deeper into enemy territory, they often outran their own support. Isolated and vulnerable, every forest and farmhouse became a potential threat. Supply lines struggled to keep up, leaving frontline troops hungry, low on ammunition, and short on fuel. Even basic medical supplies were scarce. The deprivation was relentless: cold rations, worn-out boots, and little hope of relief. The psychological toll was immense. Sleep deprivation, constant fear, and isolation created a perfect storm for mental breakdown. Soldiers' worlds shrank to the next step, the next corner, the next burst of gunfire. There was no time to process loss or grief. Emotions were buried deep, but these feelings festered, setting the stage for invisible wounds that would haunt them long after the fighting stopped. The cost of Patton's speed was paid in the minds of his men. The human mind isn't built for endless trauma. Under constant threat, soldiers developed coping mechanisms: hypervigilance and emotional numbness. Every sound became a potential danger. Nerves were stretched to the breaking point. To survive, many disconnected from their feelings, becoming numb to horror and loss. This detachment was a shield, but it left them feeling like strangers to themselves. The 1,000-yard stare became a haunting symbol. Eyes open, but lost in distant memories of war. These were not signs of weakness, but natural responses to an inhuman environment. The term combat fatigue barely scratched the surface of the psychological wounds inflicted. For Patton's men, these invisible injuries were as real as any physical wound. The epidemic of unseen trauma was a silent casualty of the relentless drive for victory. Patton, a product of an older military tradition, saw willpower as the ultimate weapon. He viewed fear as a personal failing, not a medical condition. Battle fatigue to him was cowardice, something to be overcome by force of character. Patton's solution was harsh: send suffering soldiers back to the front, limit evacuations, and treat psychological trauma as weakness. This created a climate of fear and shame, silencing those who needed help. Many suffered in silence, terrified of being labeled cowards. Instead of compassion, they faced suspicion and disdain. Patton's misunderstanding denied thousands the care they desperately needed. Patton's attitude became infamous during the Sicily campaign. In August 1943, he slapped Private Charles Cool, suffering from combat stress, calling him a coward and ordering him back to the front. A week later, he repeated the act with Private Paul Bennett, threatening him and dismissing his suffering. These slapping incidents were not isolated. They revealed Patton's deep disconnect from the realities of war's psychological toll. News of the incidents caused a scandal. General Eisenhower intervened, forcing Patton to apologize, but not relieving him of command. The events exposed a critical flaw: Patton's inability to grasp the invisible wounds of his men. His belief that only visible injuries were real left countless soldiers abandoned. The slapping incidents became a symbol of the military's failure to understand and care for psychological casualties. Patton's leadership, brilliant in battle, was blind to the suffering within his own ranks. The cost of this blindness was measured in broken spirits, not just broken bodies. The legacy of misunderstanding haunted the men long after the war. By late summer 1944, Patton's Third Army had raced across France, but their speed outpaced their supplies. The Red Ball Express struggled to keep up. Fuel, food, and ammunition ran dangerously low. Tanks and trucks stalled, not from enemy fire, but from empty gas tanks. The advance halted, soldiers became stationary targets, and morale plummeted. Shortages extended to every aspect of life, cold rations, worn-out boots, and no relief from the elements. Deprivation eroded both body and spirit. The psychological strain intensified. Hope faded as support failed to arrive. Soldiers felt abandoned, their exhaustion deepening into despair. The supply crisis turned combat fatigue into a full-blown mental health emergency. For many, this was the breaking point, the moment when the invisible wounds became overwhelming. The system had failed the very men who had carried it so far. When the war ended, millions of soldiers returned home as heroes. But for many, the real battle had just begun. The horrors and stress of combat followed them, casting a long shadow over civilian life. They struggled to reconnect with family, haunted by nightmares and sudden bursts of anger. Everyday life felt unreal, loud noises triggered panic. Society expected them to move on, but there was little understanding or support. PTSD had no name. Veterans suffered in silence, ashamed and isolated. Many turned to alcohol, relationships crumbled, and jobs were lost. The invisible wounds continued to fester, affecting families for generations. It took decades for society to recognize and treat psychological trauma. The legacy of Patton's men is a lesson. The cost of war is not just in lives lost, but in the silent suffering of survivors. Their pain reminds us that victory comes with a hidden price. Patton was a military genius. His speed and audacity helped win the war, but his relentless doctrine came at a profound human cost. The exhaustion, isolation, and anxiety he demanded from his men pushed them to the edge. His strategy won battles, but waged a silent war on the minds of his troops. The 1,000-yard stare was as much his legacy as any battlefield victory. The central question remains, does military brilliance justify the psychological destruction of those who serve? Patton's refusal to acknowledge invisible wounds left a legacy of untreated pain. Behind every celebrated general are thousands who bear the true cost of war. Their sacrifices are often silent, their wounds unseen. As we honor history's great commanders, we must never forget the human price paid for every victory.